This is the first of 2 videos looking at the new firmware update, version 5, for Midicake ARP. And this video is all about timing. Before getting to the changes though, I need to give you some background context, as it's fundamental to understanding why the new parameters work as they do. The changes are revolutionary, and so please stick with it while I do my best to explain. When I first developed ARP, I built a system that had a single timing function. And that timing function allowed a MIDI bar, which is 96 clock ticks or 4 quarter notes, to be subdivided. And initially between 1 division every 8 bars, all the way up to 32 divisions every bar. And then above that, it would move into triplets. So 24 in a bar, 12 in a bar, 6 in a bar, 3 in a bar, and so on. So 96 clock ticks is the perfect number to divide. And it's why it's used in a MIDI standard, because it subdivides by 2 and 3 very easily, and you end up with whole numbers. And that's why it exists in a MIDI standard. So I created ARP with that single parameter, with all the multiples, 2's going up and 3's going down, to give the most flexibility on a single parameter value. However, I also loved the ability it had to halve and divide, so being able to take it from 4 beats per bar up to 8, up to 16 and down again quickly was really useful from a performance point of view. But I did feel the limitation of 3 and 4, and a number of people asked me whether I could do more complex subdivisions. So let's quickly see what that sounds like. On ARP 1, I've just got this subdivided by 4 beats in a bar, 4 steps in a bar, 4 divisions in a bar, and just a simple piano sound. And if I double the values, and then if I halve the values, going back down, we quickly get into ranges that are quite slow. 1 beat per bar, 1 beat every 8 bars, and depending on the tempo, that can be minutes before the next note is played. I arbitrarily put a limit of 1 division per 8 bars because any lower than that seemed too long. And there are ways that can be overcome that with ARP. I'll talk about that in a bit. So let's set it back to what it was. So you can do things like polyrhythms and polymeters with these divisions. If you've got 2 ARPs running, for example, here on the second ARP I have this with a subdivision of 3 in per bar, 3 steps per bar or 3 divisions per bar. And if I enable that and play it, you'll hear the polyrhythm. So 1 running at 4 beats per bar, 1 running at 3 beats per bar. Now that's a fairly common polyrhythm, but it's only subtly different to a polymeter. Now, a polymeter is where, polyrhythm, let's start with that, is where a bar is the same length for both of those 2 sequences. In this case, 4 beats per bar, and in this case, 3 beats per bar. Polymeter is where the length of the bar changes. ARP kind of is a little bit different in terms of the way the length of the sequence is driven by the number of steps. And you see here on ARP 1, where we had 4 beats per bar, we're running 4 steps. And on ARP 2, we have 3 steps, 3 beats per bar. So the bar lengths are the same. But if we increase the number of steps to 4, then we'll start to have a polymeter effect, because this is still running 3 beats per bar, but there's 4 notes or 4 steps in the sequence. And so the bar changeover position from a musical perspective is in a different place. But from a pure technical MIDI perspective, the bar length is the same. It's still 96 ticks. That's the digital worldview. So that 3 division and 4 division, or 2 division, multiples of 2 and 3 into that 96 clock tick MIDI bar, is a kind of limitation that ARP has, and in fact most digital sequencers have And it's something that I wanted to overcome. I wanted to open up the time parameters so that the MIDI bar could be subdivided in any number of ways. But I still wanted to keep the ability to halve and divide the time easily when playing live. So I devised the following system. Let's just go back to ARP 1 quickly, into set. And we now have 3 parameters. We have division, we have factor, and we have function. Now I'll start with division. So time division works as before. You can halve and divide or increase or decrease the number of steps per bar or the number of divisions per bar. And then this is where the change comes in. The second parameter, time factor, sets the base multiplier for the division. And so in this case, the factor is set to 2. If I set this factor to, for example, 5, now we're doing something that ARP couldn't do before, which is play 5 beats in a bar. So then if we go back to the division parameter, as we play this now, you see we've still got 4 steps, but 5 beats in a bar. So let's change our steps to 5. So now we've got 5 steps in a bar. And you can do whatever you want. It's completely flexible, but it's easier to explain when you've got 5 notes running. So if we double this, you see the factor being 5 means that we are increasing by a factor of 5 every time we double. Now we've just doubled again, and we can't go any higher because there's an upper limit of 32 beats per bar, and doubling 20 would be 40 beats per bar, and that's too high for ARP technically to run. Plus you wouldn't really want to run anything that fast unless you were producing Gabba or hardcore or something like that, in which case you'd ramp the tempo up. If we halve the values, you can see we're just reducing to the point where we have, in this case, 5 beats every 16 bars, or 5 steps, or 5 notes played over 16 bars. And they're evenly distributed over those 15 bars. So they're equally splitting those 16 bars by a factor of 5, and so playing 5 notes in that period. So we still have the ability to do that halving and doubling, which is very powerful. And we can do that with, if we go back into factor, we can do that with 6, 7 beats per bar, 8 beats per bar, 9, and so on, all the way up to 16. So say, for example, we want, let's pick 11 beats in a bar. Go back to our time division, we can double it, and we can halve it. I mean, if we want to go crazy, we can go down to 11 beats in 64 bars, because it's still within that 1 beat every 8 bars, or close to that lower limit. What's the third parameter about then? We've been talking about halving and doubling, but the third parameter, let's go back to our 5 example again. So I'm going to set the factor to 5. When I double this, or increase the time division value, it doubles, and then doubles again, and then it doesn't go any higher. If I go to the time function parameter, I've got 2 choices. One is exponential, which is essentially halving and doubling, and the other option is incremental, which is kind of adding and subtracting. So rather than doubling the value, we simply add the factor onto the current time value every time. So in this case, as we increase it, it's going to add a factor of 5 every time. So we'll get 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and back down to 5 beats per bar. And then if we halve it or reduce it, it's no longer halving, it's subtracting 5. So it's 5 beats every 2, 5 beats every 3, and so on and so forth. And 5 beats every 5, which is 1-to-1. 5 beats in 6 bars, and so on and so forth. So you've got complete flexibility there to create almost any kind of time subdivision that you'd like. Now, if you want to completely open it up, you could, for example, set the factor to 1. Leave the function as incremental, and then your divisions are very much opened up to anything you want. 2 beats per bar, 3, 4 beats per bar, all the way up to 32 beats per bar. Can't go any higher than that. ARP simply cannot process 4 channels of 32 beats per bar any faster at 300 BPM, that is, which is the maximum tempo that ARP will run to. And we can go all the way down as well. So let's go back to something sensible. And we can subdivide 1 every 3, 1 every 4, 1 every 5, all the way down to 1 every 8, which is the slowest that ARP will run. Now, I talked before about that minimum limitation being 1 beat every 8 bars. It's actually not. There's a couple of ways that you could further reduce that. The one option is obviously to reduce the tempo to something very, very slow. And then, if you're doing very slow ambient generative stuff, then you could go all the way down to 1 beat per minute if you really wanted to. And then it's potentially hours between notes. So that's one way. But obviously, if you want to run something slow and something fast at the same time, then that's not really going to work for you. And ARP is really, it's about letting you explore and letting you create whatever you want. The other way of doing it is to set the division to 1 beat every 8 bar and then just set a rhythm pattern where you mute everything other than the first step, and then only 1 in 16 steps will play. So that's 8 bars times 16 is 128 bars. So that's 1 beat every 128 bars. So if you wanted to do that, you could. And that's just one way. So hopefully you can see how powerful those 3 parameters are and just what the possibilities are in terms of creativity and being able to play with times, especially when you can layer them. Just for fun, we'll do some really crazy timings and see what we can get. Let's increase our time division up to, let's go 4 beats per bar. And let's just drop the octave on this so it's something a bit lower. Yeah, maybe we'll go a bit slower than that. And let's increase the gate. Okay, lovely, 2 beats per bar. Now our second ARP, you remember we had it set to division of 3-1. So we get that polyrhythm, we get a triplet going on the second ARP. Our third ARP is currently set to 2-1. Let's find something crazy. Let's set the factor to 5. Let's have 5-1 going and see what happens. Let's increase the octave. That one's on. Well, let's leave it there. And all these ARPs, by the way, they're all running just direction up and a straight bounce pattern, so it's easier to understand what's going on. But already we've got some kind of weirdness going. And then on the fourth, let's set the factor to, I don't know, let's pick 9. And we've got the exponential, factor 9. Number of steps, let's set this to 9 steps and see what happens. Let's also increase the octave on that so that we can hear it appear above the others. Yeah. And we can increase that. Hopefully you can see, because they're all independent, you can create some really, really unusual timing things just with time parameters alone. And that's really what I wanted to achieve with it. So let's mute those 3 and just go back now. There's a couple of other things that that kind of needed to be tackled as well with this work. It's taken, you'll have noticed, 6 months or more for me to actually get this firmware done and out there. And the time division has been critical. It's been a major rewrite of the underlying engine for timing. There's a couple of other things that kind of rely on that as well. The first is the delay parameter. And for this, I'm just going to quickly set the division to 4. Let's set the factor up. So, yeah. And then I'm going to copy that to 2 so that you can hear the 2 things should be running at the same time. Oh, if I change the MIDI channel, that is. And let's set the octave up. Okay, it's got the 2 things running at the same time. So the delay parameter now, what used to be a kind of driven by the number of beats, is now driven as a percentage value. So it's much more, there's a higher resolution, it's much more fine granular control over the delay. And it's also, because I've spelled out quarter and half and 3/4 position, it's easier to kind of dial in an interesting delay. So yeah, I'll show you what that does. As we increase it, you'll hear that delay being pushed back, and it's much easier to dial in, for example, offbeats. So that's delay. Groove is, of course, it's just delay again, but it's per step, and it allows you to create a pattern, so it allows you to create swings within that. So as I add grooves, if you compared this like for like with the old firmware, the timing is much more closely controlled, if you like. It's the same problem as delay that just had to be resolved. But yeah, it works fine for swings and stuff. And if we increase the, hopefully you can hear. Yeah, and you can do all kinds of weird and wonderful patterns with that. And what else? Yeah, while we're on that one, modulation, of course, can still modulate time division. Works exactly the same way as before. There is a key fix, though, that wasn't the case in the previous version, which is that you can layer modulations now. So delay, groove, modulation A and modulation B. Modulation B can also have time division. Previously, it was the last one in the chain, which would have been modulation B, would have overwritten any previous delay values. But now it's a sum of all those delays and change of time division. But anyway, let's just see what that does. So if I take this one that's running now, just running a sine wave, I'm going to run it over, let me go around, let's run it over 2 bars so you can hear it. Turn it on, and then as you'll hear it speeding up and slowing down. And obviously dialing in the amount of modulation is kind of key to getting something that sounds right. You also hear it like reset itself slightly, particularly when you've got low amounts. You'll hear it try and track, and that's because ARP is deterministic, so it's working it out on the fly every time as if it had always been running at, in this case, 1%. And you've got a lot of control over that because you are targeting time division, and time division is now driven by the factor and the function. Then those settings are also obeyed. So at the moment it's incrementing 1, 2, 3, 4 beats per bar, but then the modulation is taking it up through 5, 6, 7 and so on. However, if we change the factor to, let's say, 4, and we'll leave function as incremental, what we're going to be modulating through is 4, 8, 12, 16 and so on. And so you get quite a different result from the modulation. And importantly, depending on the style of music that you're playing, that might be what you want from the modulation, which is something that stays on a division factor of, in this case, 4, or whatever musical time that you're working with. But it's quite a powerful way of keeping everything in sync while still getting variation within your sequences. And of course, just to reiterate, because ARP is deterministic, and I've said this many times, ARP is deterministic. It only responds with output for the given input, and you'll get the same output every time. So if we find ourselves with a lovely little pattern, every time we press play, it's always going to do the same thing. And we can be halfway through a performance, change some parameters around, and you know that it's going to do the same thing every time. So that's the timing functions. It does open up possibility for us to do more interesting things in the future. A higher resolution internal clock gives us the option to do some really funky things, but, watch this space. All of this has been, to the best of my abilities, explained in the manual. There's also an appendix added to the manual which looks solely at these topics, specifically at the timing parameters and the implications and how all these parameters kind of interact. And you can download that at the manuals page on the website, midicake.com/manuals. I hope you found this video really useful. There'll be the other half of this intro deep dive, if you like, into the new firmware update v5 for Midicake ARP. But thanks for watching.